So the ratio of people who say, I'd like to write a book to people who have actually, in fact, written a book is weighted very heavily towards the former. What's the secret to becoming the latter? Colin, start us off.
Okay, well, it's very hard for me to pinpoint where the inspiration to write books came from. I know I was dabbling in short stories and interviewing some Australian aviators and putting their stories together for an airline magazine. I'd never really contemplated writing a book. I thought it was beyond me, and I think all of the participants here would agree with me that they find the thought of putting together a book daunting. Surprisingly, once they get into it, as several of them have found, they suddenly sweep past the contracted number of words by an enormous amount, simply because they're so enthusiastic about writing about this subject. And the hardest thing is for them to curb this enthusiasm, to bring the manuscript down. There's a Jeffrey over in Ireland at the moment has just gone through that exercise. He had to basically cut his book by a third, but it'll be a better book for that. I had the same experience in my very first book, which was writing about some Australians who were in Colditz. I put it into the publishers and they said, okay, you have to reduce it by 40,000 words. I had no editing skills up to that time, but I know that the book became a lot better for it. It was tighter, more compact, the stories worked better, the characters I introduced, it all just came together. And to see these people writing these books now who have had, in most cases, limited writing experience, but they came to me with trust, and I trusted them to produce a book, or books now in several cases, and they found the experience not only difficult, but exhilarating. So exhilarating that once they finished, they sat back, and you can empathize with this entirely. What am I going to write about next? Colin, here's an idea. And I'll pursue that idea with the University of Nebraska Press, and the editor who's looking after it at the moment, Rob Taylor, he is incredibly supportive. I've not had an author put in a proposal yet that has been rejected. That's the strength of these people writing for this series. Look at them now. They're all enthusiastic about being part of this panel, and they want to continue the Outward Odyssey beyond my lifetime, which is fine with me, I guess. At the moment, we've got 18 books in the series that have been published. There's another one coming out very shortly. It's almost in the warehouse now. And there are several books either being written or in the publication process right now. So if the series was to end right now with the books that are in the offing, there'd be 26 books. It started out as 8. And I was wondering at the time, how in the name of hell are we going to get 8 books on this subject? It continues. I keep getting people writing to me saying, I haven't written a book before, but I'd love to write a book about this subject. And I encourage them. Sometimes badly, but for the most part, look at the series. Look at the stories that have been told that would have been lost. Again, I refer back to Jay. I believe him to be the Tom Wolfe of unmanned exploration, planetary exploration. He's done an enormous job with a subject that most people consider dry and over-technical. Probably his sales don't reflect as well in his books as in the more popular subjects. But by God, they're mighty books. John once explained to me how Elliot C. and Charlie Bassett's aircraft crashed, and we put that into the revised edition of Fallen Astronauts. He nailed that story so much better than my research had found out. And Francis, it's always been, we've known each other since the mid-80s. We've always gotten on enormously well. I'm so glad that we put together those first 2 books in the series, and he continues. All of them are continuing. I haven't had one person yet who's said, that'll do me. And thank God that that's the largely unspoken story behind the Outward Odyssey series.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing that. Michelle, what's the secret?
Oh, gee. Yeah. I mean, I started my project in 1983. It took 30 years to get it written. I know I'm one of those people that Colin is talking about, that when I finally did write, it just kept going. I had 30 years of research, interviews, everything to get out. And I know he finally came back and said, it's really nice, it's great, but you got to get rid of at least 10% of it. And I told him, it's like, that's impossible. There's no way I could do that. And but you know, he was right. And as he always is, he is a fantastic editor. And in the end, I actually cut out 12%. And I'm glad I did, because it's a much better book because of what he got me to do. But throughout so many of those years, I really believed I was never going to be able to get this book written. You know, when you pick up a book that's 400 or 500 pages long, you look at that and it's like, how does somebody do that? And I'd done a lot of writing, but they were always like magazine articles, editorials, things like that. And to set out to say, okay, I'm going to tell a coherent story over several hundred pages involving all these people, and it's not a fiction story, so there are people out there who are going to know the real story, and they're going to ride my butt if I get it wrong. No pressure there at all. And so after all those years, when I finally got it together and said, yeah, I think I can start writing this thing, and I sat down, and it took me 8 months to get that thing out, which I was absolutely amazed at. I thought, okay, maybe I'll get through it in a year and a half, 2 years. And I know Colin felt the same way at first, but from beginning to end, actually getting it out, it only took 8 months. It had been rolling around in my head for so long that I couldn't type it fast enough. And I remember so many times of writing up a section in the story, and it's like, wow, that was during the first interview, and I've always been thinking, what's it going to be like when I put that down on paper? And there it is. And then, of course, on top of it, I also had my wife sitting here next to me when I'm reading the stuff that I'd written to her, and she would be the first person to call me out and said, that didn't make sense at all. So she is definitely my muse. She's the person who got me to be coherent to everybody. And she's the one who wrote me and said, you've got to get this done. You have to get this story out. So having somebody like that standing behind you, standing over your shoulder, is a really good thing for a writer to have as well, I will have to say.
Sure, yes. All right. Francis.
I love this question. I love what's the secret to writing a successful book? This comes up a lot at author conferences, particularly with people like Dan Brown and some of the bestseller people. They'll be like, what's the secret? And there's always this what if it's a secret, he's not going to tell you, otherwise it wouldn't be a secret anymore, right? But also the question tends to be like, do you have special pens? Are they to your left or your right? Do you have a yellow piece of paper or a blue? And what do you write on? What time of day? Is there a cat with you? It's always ephemera, as if you get all these things around you in the right order. All of a sudden this book will magically appear. And of course it's nothing like that. It's hard. And my understanding is tonight we're talking to a group of world-class engineers who know how engineering works. And to use, as we're all using tonight, analogies, you never see the world-class engineers go, I'm going to build this rocket. Here I go. I'm going to start from the bottom. Okay, I'm at the top. Here's the rocket. It all works great, right? I'm assuming, because I'm the world-class engineer. I just started at one end. I've done the other. You test, and it fails. You test up to the limit, and it crumbles somewhere along the way, but you know where that limit is. You know that, okay, from there, I can't go any further than that I can try it just about there. You work as a team. You listen to your teammates. You are honest with each other. You say, if it doesn't work, if something's going wrong, if there's a mistake, tell me now without any penalty, rather than it blowing up in orbit where we can't work out what the hell happened to it. And then we go, oh, 6 months ago, I was too scared to tell you that rivet was in the wrong place. You have to rely on your team. You have to rely on feedback. Writing's exactly the same. It's a constant editing. There's more time goes into editing than into that first draft. You write something down, it looks great. You leave it a few days, you come back and you read it again almost as if you're a stranger, and you go, well, that part's okay, but oh my God, that part doesn't make any sense to me, and I wrote it this week. Let me start again. Let me revise it. Let me change that around. And then somebody else will read it and say, I don't get this. Okay, instead of taking it personally and going, well, I know what I meant. You're like, well, if they don't get it, nobody else is going to get it. So you revise, you polish it. So just like eventually when, David's SLS spacecraft is going to be sitting on a launch pad ready to go, and it's going to have been the most tested spacecraft. It's going to have been polished. There's going to be lots more people than the actual metal benders who've done it. There's going to be huge teams of people thinking, what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? Writing books is pretty much the same. You keep working at it. You keep changing it. You expect to go wrong. You expect your ideas to get ripped apart. And at the end of it, at the end of this up all night, intense process, you end up with something that you're proud of and you're polished and you feel good at sharing with the world.
All right. Jay?
Well, I mentioned at the top of this panel that I used to edit movies and television shows. And when I got deep into my first book here for the series, it occurred to me how similar the process was actually of writing something at this scale, how similar it was to editing a feature film, and little feature film, not a big one. But what was interesting to me was how you attacked both of them in these little bite-sized nibbles. At least for me, anyway. It's discipline. It's not really thinking about the big picture on a day-to-day basis, but it's like, what do I need to do today? What's some little thing that I can knock off, a little bite that I can take that's going to move me down the road on this project without thinking really, really big. I mean, you can't sit and think every day about, oh my gosh, I'm only this many words in, and I'm only this far through my timeline, and I still have this decades of history that I still have to go through. You've got to take it in smaller chunks like that than thinking about like the grand picture. That's really been the secret for me, if there is a secret. I remember on the first book getting to the point where I said, if I have 15 minutes, even in the morning between finishing brushing my teeth and walking out the door, if I have 15 minutes, I can accomplish something in that time period, whether it's responding to somebody's email, making a backup of my work. If you don't have backups, you all should. Something like that. Just taking those little bite-sized chunks every day. So that's really what if there is some kind of a secret, that's what it's been for me. Is like, what little thing can I bite off today that's going to move me down the road?
You're very close to what I was going to say. The secret to writing a book, the secret to having written a book, is to have written a book. That really kind of is how you do it. Like I talked about, when I started working on Homesteading Space, I was about 1.5 years out of newspapers. I sat down several nights in a way, plowed away, wrote. I'd written any number of long, in-depth, biting, investigative newspaper reports before. Sat down after several nights of writing, looked at the collected assemblage of Homesteading Space that I had, realized that it was now the longest thing I had ever written in my life, and I was 3% of the way to book length. And so I sat down the next night and I wrote, and over the course of several more nights, I got to like 6% of book length. And it turns out if you do that night after night after night after night, after day after day, after week after week, after month, You'll eventually get to like 125% of book length, and Colin will tell you to bring it back to 100%. But you know, that's the secret. That's what there is to it, is do the thing and just keep doing the thing. And it's so easy to get wrapped around the axle and caught up in your head of what am I doing, and this is a book and I don't know anything about writing books. And oh, if you read the first chapter of Homesteading, it's kind of shameful, because I was like so trying to write a book. I am a serious writer writing a book now, and I'm using words like bailiwick because that's a thing that real book writers do. But at some point you realize you're just doing this thing, and so you know, kind of the secret is, the tip is, you know, just do the thing. I was very lucky. I didn't have a Sherry, but I had 2 astronauts that I was partnered with to work on this book, and having like major American heroes holding you accountable for actually doing this thing that you're supposed to be doing is also a wonderful thing. If you can somehow loop astronauts in as accountability partners for anything that you're doing, I heartily recommend it. It's a great idea, but that certainly made homesteading a whole lot easier than it might have been as a first-time author otherwise. John, getting back to you, what's the secret?
Well, in my case, certainly the secret to my success has been working with a co-author, working with Mel Croft, having that teammate, much like you did on Homesteading Space. You're always working together, bouncing ideas off of each other. It's encouraging to work with somebody else. You're always kind of self-motivated because you don't want to let the other partner down. So that's certainly been the key to my success in writing. And we're going through that process again right now with the new book on spacewalking on EVA. Still at the research and the interviewing part of the book writing process, but it's exciting to be there again. It's a new thing. It reminds you of doing your first project. You remember some of the mistakes you made and how to correct those. But it's just, people don't realize how fun it is. Like you've been saying, you know, you get a phone call one day from this famous guy or lady, and then you do that interview, and then you type that up and you share that success with your writing partner. And next day, here comes an email from Mel saying, wow, you wouldn't believe how great this one. Guess who called me today? It's just so much fun. But, you know, in listening to some of the other comments, one thing that comes to mind for me is when I was much younger and braver, I did some skydiving. And I kind of related writing your first book, especially to that experience, because you do so much preparation, so much training, so much thinking about what's about to happen to you, and it's daunting. It's intimidating. It's scary. And then you go out the door and you're thinking of things in order. What has to happen next? Well, I want that parachute to open. Great. So it opens. And the next thing you know, you're on the ground. Here comes, just like when your book is published, now you're safe and sound. Everything worked out fine. But the first thing you want to do is do it again. It was so much fun the first time around. You have no idea how cool it is. And you just want to sign right back up and do it again. It's a great experience, not something I ever expected to have.